Hello, Green Spring. Today is Wednesday, July 6th, 2016. I'm Fran Duval, your host today, and I'm so happy I'm here again with our resident expert on presidents, Len Kalkworth. Hi, Len.
Hi, Fran.
Do you like me calling you an expert?
Well, I think that's a misnomer here.
Well, let's say you're probably the one that's researched them the most.
That's possible. Whether or not I know the most, that's another question. But,
okay.
However, today we're going to spend some time about the 34th president, and he was president from 1953 until 1961. 2 terms, 2 consecutive terms. I'd like to talk a little bit about him first before we show some pictures. We're going to spend some time today on the presidential library of Eisenhower. But he was the most popular president probably that we've ever had. In fact, so much so that apparently one woman, when she was told that he had had a heart attack during his presidency, she said, "I don't care. I'd vote for him even if he were dead." But he was extremely popular during that whole time. He was referred to as a man of peace, and he spent 2 terms, 8 years, and he had a 64% approval rate during that time. So that's extremely good. Now, many have said that he could have been elected to a 3rd term. In fact, there were those who certainly wanted him to be able to have a 3rd term. However, the 22nd Amendment kept him from being reelected. It was an amendment that had been proposed by the Republicans because they were so disappointed or discouraged because of FDR. And that amendment was passed, and so the first person that could not become have a 3rd term was a Republican, and that's interesting. So, okay, we're going to move on a little bit and show some pictures of, first of all, his the grounds of his presidential library, and this is a statue of General Eisenhower, and it's referred to as the Man of Peace.
And where is that, Len?
Now, this is in Abilene, and the next, Abilene, Kansas, by the way. And the next picture will show us a little bit about that. Abilene is a small town located a short distance into Kansas when you come from the east. And it covers the grounds cover a period of a space of 22 acres. Very flat land, as Kansas is, but a lot of beautiful trees as well. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. And Ike was known for enjoying sports. He played football, he played any number of sports, but he was also an organizer of the sports. And they indicated that this was a sign that he was a well-organized person who was very much interested in showing that kind of leadership quality. The other thing that they have said about Eisenhower is that he had a ferocious temper and never really would learn to control it. He controlled it more than when he was young, but when he was very young, he had a very, very strong temper. Okay. The next picture will show us the grounds of the library. That is the library off in the distance. He graduated from the military academy in West Point in the class of 1915, and the class had a total of 164 members, and 64 of those members became generals.
Wow.
They said this is a class upon whom the stars had fallen. And then, of course, 2 of the generals had 4 stars, Eisenhower and Bradley, and both of them, by the way, then received 5 stars during the wartime, the World War II. Okay, we'll go on to another picture here. This talks about, and this is a very difficult one to read, I realize, but it talks about his graduating from West Point, going to Sam Houston in Texas as a young lieutenant. He met Mamie there. They got married, and then explains a little bit about his early days as a young lieutenant. The next thing that we want to talk about is his experience with General MacArthur. And again, this is one that's difficult to read, I realize, but the bonus army after World War I, the World War I veterans received a bonus that they could not collect until some years later. And during the Depression, any number of veterans, along with their families and others, went to Washington, called the Bonus March, demanding that they receive their pension earlier than what they had been told originally. Mm-hmm. And Herbert Hoover was president at the time. Eisenhower was serving under General MacArthur, who was not a general at that time, but under MacArthur. And at that particular time, MacArthur really took the things in his own hands. Instead of just simply trying to keep the peace, he basically drove them out of Washington. And Eisenhower was not at all in favor of that, but of course he was serving under him. And I often wonder why it was that MacArthur wasn't maybe even court-martialed at that time, because he was disobeying orders, but nevertheless he did not. And Eisenhower continued to serve under him for some time. We have a picture, I think, of him with Eisenhower and MacArthur, and this was in the Philippines. He served as an aide to MacArthur, or under MacArthur, in the Philippines for about 4 years, I think it was. Mm-hmm. From 1936 until 1940. Again, this is a picture of things in the Philippines. And all of these pictures, by the way, are from the museum at the Eisenhower Library in Abilene, Kansas. We have a picture then of Eisenhower with the guns. And this is a reminder that Eisenhower was very much involved in World War II, became the commanding general of the Army, was credited for really saving Europe and winning the war in World War II. After the war, Eisenhower then was appointed to be the supreme commander of NATO, and these are the flags of the NATO countries. The next picture will tell about the different countries that are involved, and the names of the countries, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay. In addition to being the supreme commander of NATO, he then also, after that, served as the president of Columbia University. He was the author of the best-selling a book entitled Crusade in Europe, which was a very well-received book, and I remember reading it. It was a very interesting book about the whole experience in Europe and saving Europe. Just before 1952, well, prior to that, people were already talking about having Eisenhower as president. And both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party wanted him. Nobody really knew what party he was a part of, but later he decided to run as a Republican. And this was a contested convention which took place in 1952, and I remember seeing this on television, and it was the first convention that I saw, and maybe it was the first one on television. And he was running against Robert Taft, and Taft was the isolationist, and he was more of the for the Republican Party. Eisenhower was more of the internationalist, and it was a very interesting convention, as I recall. After Eisenhower won the nomination, they chose as the vice president Richard Nixon. And my reading of the thing indicates that it wasn't so much that Eisenhower chose him, but the party chose him to kind of balance within the party. And apparently Nixon and Eisenhower were never extremely close. But Nixon, of course, was noted for being one who had been opposed to communism and was hunting the communists or the Reds at that time. And that probably is the reason that he was placed on the ticket. When Eisenhower, after he was nominated, he said that he would go to Korea to end the war, or I don't know whether he said he would end the war, but he would go to Korea, and that really made it possible for him to win the election, because his opponent had no chance after that. And 6 months after he became president, the Korean armistice was signed. Okay, I think we just saw a picture of some paintings. Eisenhower was noted for being a painter in his spare time. There was another president, by the way, who was noted for painting later on, by the name of George Bush.
George W. Bush.
George W. Bush.
Yeah, right.
But amateur painters, obviously. The thing that Eisenhower enjoyed doing, and he was noted for this even during his presidency, was playing golf. And people didn't care. They didn't care that he was spending a lot of time playing golf, because the country was, it was a rather docile mood at that time. I think when you think back, the war was over. People were happy about that. The economy was good. There didn't seem to be any major problems. There were no wars going on. And however, it seemed to me, as I've been doing some reading, it was not all that docile, tranquil. There were other things going on underneath that I think came to the surface later on. And there were two major moral issues at the time during his presidency, neither one of which Eisenhower really wanted to deal with. The first one was McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy. And McCarthyism was just running rampant at that time. McCarthy was making all kinds of statements about the number of communists that were in the State Department, and of course that was the big fear at that time, about the communists. And McCarthy was just playing on that fear and making all kinds of nonsensical statements that he could not back up, but he made it and just played on the fears of people. He made the statement, for example, that there were at least 57 communists in the State Department. Somebody commented he probably was sitting in a restaurant and got that figure off the Heinz ketchup bottle when he was just made that statement. But it just charges like him. Unfortunately, Eisenhower didn't want to deal with that, didn't really deal with it outright. For example, Eisenhower was making a speech out in the Midwest. I think it was out in Wisconsin. And in the speech, he was making, he had in there that the statement that McCarthy had made about Bradley, that he was apparently some communist leanings or whatever. Instead of making that statement, when he made that speech, he took it out. And he did not defend Bradley at that particular point, which many felt was just a wrong thing for him to have done. However, he defended him later on in different ways, obviously, and it did not hurt Bradley at all. The other thing that was going on at that particular time was school integration. What is it, the Brown versus Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court. And Eisenhower really was not in favor of that decision, according to the things that I have read. However, he had to deal with it when they, I guess it was Central High School, when these, I think it was 9 black students were to enter, and the governor of Arkansas was going to call out the troops, but Eisenhower called out the federal troops and made possible for them to enter the school, not because he was that much in favor of it, but this was the law of the land.
Well, he had to follow the Supreme Court ruling.
And he talked about the fact that this was the law, and I had to follow the law, so, okay. All right, so much for that. Let's go on. Let's see what else we have here. This speaks very well for Eisenhower in terms of the values that he believed in. First of all, he believed in a provident God, and these are some of the values that he grew up with in Kansas, you know, honesty and hard work and belief in God and so on, and family. These were all the traditional values of the Midwest, and he certainly believed in those. Then we'll go on to the chapel. We're on the grounds here at the Eisenhower Library. Beautiful chapel. It is the final resting place for both Eisenhower and his wife Mamie and their firstborn son. They're all buried there. Beautiful stained glass window. A lot of marble came for the crypts that came from Europe, but the building itself was made from limestone from Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
Then right on the grounds is Eisenhower's home. This is where he grew up as a boy, and it was moved here. He grew up on a farm right outside of Abilene, Kansas, and this is the house itself.
Wow, that's a big house.
It's a large house, but it's typical like a farmhouse of that day. We'll see some of the interior right away. Here is, I guess, the living room. And then we'll move on to the next one, I think, is the bedroom.
Mm-hmm. And they're like that. Did you see those rooms when you were visiting the library?
Oh, yes. I took
That's
those.
open to the public?
It is open to the public, and I took all of these pictures that were...
Does anybody live there in that house?
No, it's strictly for display.
Okay.
And I would say it's a typical Midwestern farmhouse, but a very nice one. Now, there are 5 pylons here, or towers. Each one has an inscription on it. And these 5 pylons represent or in a reminder of his parents. One of them is for his parents, and there's an inscription on each one of them. And the other one is for their 6 sons. Another one is for the servicemen and women. Another is for the ideals of democracy. And the 5th one is in honor of his parents. And that's what the 5 pylons are.
You cover those in your book, don't you?
Yes, I do. And interestingly enough, this morning when I was trying to remember what these 5 pylons stood for, I went to the internet to find out what they were. And I was rather amazed and pleased that it directed me to my book.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So, okay. All right, the next one, again, when Eisenhower was a young military officer, he was involved in taking a convoy across the United States. It took them, I think, 60 days, something like that. It was a long time. They averaged 6 miles an hour.
Oh my gosh.
And one of the things that it showed was the road conditions of that time. And of course...
and when would this have been, do you know?
Pardon me?
What years would that have been?
I think this was in the, like 1917, something like that.
Oh, okay, that early.
Very early.
Okay.
But because of that, and one of the reasons at least, because of that, Eisenhower was very much for the interstate highway program, which he signed. And of course now we are so blessed with that because we can just travel without worrying about dirt roads and getting stuck and so on, as they did with their convoy. The other thing that prompted him to be for the interstate system was when he was in World War II, the German Autobahn, which showed how easy it was to move troops and so on. And this was part of the idea of defense for the United States.
And so he developed the interstate.
Yes.
Or he encouraged that to be developed.
Encouraged that. He signed that particular law. He also signed something that I find very interesting. Not in addition to the interstate highway system, he signed the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is a very long system as well, coming from the Atlantic Ocean going to the Great Lakes. And of course, when a ship can go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, it can also go from there down the Mississippi River to the Gulf. So this is a great system. This showed, last summer Beverly and I were in Canada, and we saw the Eisenhower Lock. And this is fortunately, when we were there, a large cargo ship was just coming from the Atlantic, and this is the ship entering the lock. And then in a matter of minutes after it was in the lock, the water had raised this huge ship and was ready to go off into the Great Lakes. I think we have another picture on that. Yeah, here's the cargo ship ready to go out.
Wow.
After it went out toward the Great Lakes, then we noticed a number of recreational ships were coming, boats were coming in, and also went through the lock the other way. So it's used both for cargo and for recreational. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. After Eisenhower retired, he went to Pennsylvania, where he had a farm. This farm is right outside of the Gettysburg battleground, and this is a picture of the farm.
I've been there.
All right. Then this is a working farm, by the way. Oh, by the way, this is a picture of the porch, and this is Eisenhower's painting. Apparently he's enjoyed this particular part of his house very, very much. The house itself was full of many things that Mamie had collected during the days of their marriage. As I say, it's a working farm. They were growing Black Angus cattle, as we can see here. That was true during the time that he was living there, and continues to this day. And then one more picture here, and this is taken in the chapel. It talks about his birth date and his death, and this is where he is buried, in the chapel. So that's basically what I want to talk about in terms of Eisenhower and his presidential library. And it was a good reminder of all the things that Eisenhower was doing. Okay.
Well, during this time of, May, June, July, we have on television a lot of films that commemorate some of the battles in the World War II. And of course, you see a lot of Eisenhower in those, or his policies.
Yeah. I must say that one of the things about the museum, in one way, I guess I was disappointed in the sense that there is not that much about his presidency. There is an awful lot about his military experience, and in some ways I can understand that, because this is what he was remembered for, really, in terms of his World War II experience and so on. So many, many things in the museum are about World War II, not so much about his presidency.
And seeing the easy way he became president, I mean, easy in the sense of the country ready for honoring a military hero.
Right.
It's been a while since we've had anybody that would fall into that category.
That's true.
Because fortunately, not many wars, not on the worldwide scale like that was.
Yeah.
What did when he was in the White House, now Nixon was his vice president the whole time?
Yes.
All 8 years? Okay. And then Nixon followed him right into the... No. Kennedy followed him. That's right.
What happened with Nixon, though, is that there was a serious question about whether or not he would stay as vice president. Back in the first term, for example, right after they were nominated, there was a whole question about whether or not Nixon had taken money that went for the campaign fund and used it privately and so on. And then he went on television and made that famous, now referred to as the Checkers speech. And the reason it's called the Checkers speech is because it had to do with a dog. And Nixon had made the comment that he would not give back this dog that his kids were so pleased with, and so on. And it may have been the saving grace for him, because people thought, well, anybody who felt that way about his children and so on ought to continue to be on the ticket. And so he did stay on it. But
did anybody challenge him in the second term, or do you not know that?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when Eisenhower, how many years did he live in Pennsylvania?
Not many years. I don't know offhand, but there were a number of years he lived there on the farm. But
and
I don't know.
When you showed that chapel plaque, now that was back in Abilene, right?
Yeah, that's back in the
not
chapel.
In Pennsylvania.
That's right,
okay.
in the chapel. That's where he was buried then, after he died.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and didn't he have several heart attacks?
He had
While he was
he
president?
had something else in addition to a heart attack. I forget what it was, but he survived the heart attack okay.
Which many of us today do.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
You can
indeed.
speak
Yes.
to that
Yeah,
with your
right.
dear wife.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Len, these presidents you're doing right now are all presidents which we've lived through.
That is correct.
And that makes it somewhat easier for us to
Yes, in fact,
relate.
in all the presidential libraries, I lived through their presidencies, even though I didn't remember, obviously, the first couple very well, at least Herbert Hoover, because we would go back to 1929, I guess, when he started. So.
You weren't of age to vote for him.
I was hardly of age to be able to understand.
Even though he was a fellow Iowan.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And when we started this series 3 years ago or 4 years ago, whenever we started, I don't remember. They need to tell us sometime how many years we'd been doing this. But we started with Hoover.
Yes, and then we skipped around, and then we really started with Jackson. And from Jackson, we did every one of them since then.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the next time, which will be in October, I guess, we will do
John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy.
Right. And I have some pictures of John F. Kennedy's place, and we'll show that.
Right, right. Well, if anybody wants to know more about what Len and his wife do with their spare time over the last number of years, is they go visit these libraries. Oh, does he have a statue in Williamsburg like all the other presidents?
Yes.
A bust or
on the what do they call it? The Park of the Presidents.
Park of the Presidents in Williamsburg.
Yes. Yeah.
And every president. Is
Every
Obama
president.
there yet?
I don't know. I haven't been there for the last several years.
But anyway, if anybody does want to know more about this wonderful subject and about what's at the presidential libraries, Len's book, on the presidential libraries is getting to be popular. Well, obviously, it was referred to in your research here. That's
the
great.
other thing that, of course, is happening now is the possibility of the Eisenhower Memorial here in D.C.
Where are they going to try to do that?
Well, it's on the side of the mall. I can't identify exactly where it is, but it's on the side of the mall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful, and I hope it entices you all to tell your friends to watch the show later in the day. Let me just tell you what else is going on today.